This presentation contains graphic images that may be disturbing to some of you. Nevertheless, they show some of the realities Canadian Forces members face and will continue to face as they serve Canada around the world. You may wish to close your eyes when they appear.
We went into Croatia in 1992, the first one's in. The Croatian War was supposedly over. And in my camp, November Company, the very first night in Croatia, we were hit with a mortar attack. And that kind of set the tone, I guess, of the tour.
When we went into the Medak pocket, everything was in flames. The next morning, Major Drew and I walked up to visit the platoon, and on our way going up the path, I think we discovered 9 bodies going up the paths. At the base of the path, there was an old farmer shot in the head. His head looked like a pumpkin. It was just all swollen up. They had eyes shot him. You know, I remember going in there and I said, "Come on, when you sons of bitches just fire around at us, for we would have an excuse to nail you." That's what I wanted. I was mad.
On se faisait tirer à tous les jours.
Hey, we were being shot at every day. Every day. We just took it in stride. Big deal. Sure, we'd protect ourselves, but at the end of the tour, we'd say to ourselves, they're not shooting at us. They're shooting next to us. Well, till one of my guys was shot. It wasn't funny. I'm laughing now, but it really wasn't funny.
C'est pas drôle.
These are more than war stories. For many men and women of the Canadian Forces returning from military operations, experiences like these are open wounds. If ignored, they can develop into disabling operational stress injuries. Canadian Forces members often witness terrible human tragedy. But in their efforts to support these victims, they often don't pay attention to their own suffering. Lieutenant Commander William Bowes was about to take command of his ship when a number of his crew were tasked to assist with the recovery effort.
My sailors had committed suicide. I had another one attempted suicide, and I sort of felt sort of powerless and somewhat responsible for these people who ultimately were left in my care. I was finding that couldn't concentrate at work. My superiors were losing confidence in me, and again, rightfully so. I wasn't the person that they had given command of the ship to. I was becoming less and less of a person every day, and less and less motivated. You know, the story doesn't really get much better. Lack of confidence in myself, self-esteem went down. I wasn't sleeping for days and days on end, and I was refusing to admit that I had a problem.
Yeah, all of a sudden, I'm tired of seeing dead people. I really am. There's an old saying that if you took a native's picture, you stole a part of their soul. I think it's the right idea, but it's the wrong end of the camera.
Should have been on the ambulance.
I feel as if I'm still sucked in a wormhole going down deeper and deeper. It feels terrible. It feels helpless. I'd like to be capable again. Some things, and for short periods of time, I think I'm extremely capable. But other stuff, I'm just not.
Most people, when they're exposed to that sort of a circumstance, will react. It's very normal to have a reaction that persists, that can last for a period of time, usually a few days to a few weeks. But the normal recovery process, for reasons which are not entirely clear, seems to break down, so that the person remains haunted by their exposure to that traumatic event.
Having often put aside their own psychological well-being, many members will begin to show changes in behavior. If they don't pay attention to these early warning signs and don't find the support they need, the behavior worsens. Some members become unable to perform their duties. Others become obsessed with their performance and their career, while many become disciplinary problems and an administrative burden for the Canadian Forces.
I got to the point where I couldn't focus. I look at that paper and I sit there and I panic because I couldn't fill it out. I was scared of being detected that I wasn't performing the same as I used to, because I took pride in being a soldier. And I got scared. And so I put my release in. Basically wrote a one-liner to who it may concern. I'm requesting my release at this time. And I had just coming up to my 25th year, and I got out.
Well, I was crying all the time. I wasn't sleeping. Most times I wouldn't leave the house. I was very withdrawn. After my fiancé and I broke up, who would want me? I was broken. I didn't know how to fix it. So I've often thought of driving my car off the road, but I never did it. Couldn't get the nerve up.
My personal life had been in tatters for years, but professionally I was always able to stay at a high standard, even after that first tour. But once Kosovo came about, I started to deteriorate rapidly. And when I fell apart professionally, there was nothing left in my personal life because that had already fallen apart years beforehand. And so that's when I went and sought help.
Operational stress injuries are psychological wounds that can develop as a result of a member's reactions to highly stressful situations over the course of a career or during a single event.
An operational stress injury is it's not a medical term per se. In fact, it's a term that's been used, I think, quite nicely to help people understand that when they go on a deployment, they can be exposed to things which can later lead to psychological or emotional suffering. So it's a term that really means the whole range of problems that can happen to a person as a result of their deployment.
In spite of their rigorous and ongoing training, a certain number of Canadian Forces members will sustain physical or psychological injuries related to operations. Just as in a parachute jump, where everyone is subjected to the same conditions, and most hit the drop zone without injury, some will break their leg, or ankle, or worse. There's no way of knowing beforehand which members will make it unharmed, which ones will be wounded, or to what extent and how quickly those who were injured will recover from their injuries.
You know, your rucksack has a certain amount of weight into it, and if you have sustained a psychological injury, then there's going to be maybe 10 or 20 more pounds in there. It's like being able to, you're still going to be able to walk. And then, of course, if you go through an incident where something else stressful has happened to you or some other emotional event, then that's another 10 or 20 pounds. And after a while, that weight gets built up in your rucksack. And as long as you stay on your feet, you're okay. But if you fall over, maybe it's a hard time getting up again. Maybe it takes a long time to get up.
Physical injuries get proper attention because they are visible and obvious to those around the victim, and because there's an immediately perceived threat to the person's life or well-being. Psychological injuries can be just as life-threatening, but to the uninformed member, they are harder to perceive and accept, and they are easier to deny, particularly when the person is pursuing a career in the military. A survey of over 3,000 American troops returning from Iraq and Afghanistan revealed that among troops with psychological problems, being seen as weak, fear of harm to one's career, embarrassment, and fear of being blamed for their symptoms were significant reasons for not seeking help. In Canada, the recent Board of Inquiry and Ombudsman's report have highlighted similar findings.
Pas moi, peut-être les autres.
Not me. Somebody else, sure. But can't happen to me. You see, I've always considered myself an excellent soldier. What could affect me? I couldn't see for myself. Can't happen. But I've been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. It must be true, because when I take the medication, I don't have the symptoms. So that is what's affecting me.
I became a very hard man on that first tour, and I never took my flak vest off. And every time a tour came up, there was absolutely no doubt I was going. No question not to go. When a career course came up, I was going. It was important for me to work in my career. So I just became a hard man, and I never lost that. And I became harder and harder as every tour kind of came about.
Operational stress injuries are in no way related to one's courage or character. One day in 1998, Sergeant Maurice Robert was dropped into a wooded area to rescue a crew of his own SARTEC colleagues whose helicopter had just crashed.
And then I finally find these other SARTECs about 50 yards away from the initial site, and they were both found very close together, laying down. One was horizontal, and the other looked as if, to me at the time, I thought he might have been crawling to try to reach his buddy, maybe to give him assistance, whatever. And it was like in a T formation. I guess I just had that picture in my mind. Excuse me. And that's what actually disturbed me, is that I thought that one of them was probably still alive and trying to help out his buddy, his team members. But no, they were both dead.
He's fake.
He's faking. A lot of people still think that way. Hey, about 6 months ago, I was talking to one of my buddies, warrant officer like myself, and I was trying to explain what these injuries are all about. And he said, bullshit, it isn't true. That's what he said. These things don't exist. And if I were to round up 10 of my buddies, good buddies, who will remain my buddies, I'm pretty sure that at least 3 or maybe even 5 of them would think the same thing. So we might not be as advanced as we think we are.
On n'est peut-être pas aussi avancé qu'on aimerait l'être.
Is it possible to fake the symptoms? Yes. People can fake the symptoms. Do most people who present with symptoms fake their symptoms? As far as we can tell, the answer to that is no. Majority of people who are presenting suffering, and certainly the ones that I see, live abominable. I don't know if that's the right word, but deplorable. I mean, they're suffering. They're in pain, oftentimes suicidal. I mean, there's no benefit in that.
Throughout history, operational stress injuries have been known by a variety of other names. Nostalgia, shell shock, battle fatigue, or combat stress reaction. Today, the term operational stress injury is used by clinicians working in the Canadian Forces to describe persistent psychological problems resulting from operational duties. Common operational stress injuries include major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and anxiety disorders. International research has shown that social support is one of the most effective prevention strategies. It can moderate the effects of trauma and can have a positive impact on mental health outcomes. As well, recent research conducted in the Canadian Forces shows that social support has a significant influence on the quality of life of military personnel with post-traumatic stress disorder.
I think there's a lot of stigma around any kind of mental illness in society in general, and certainly in the military. People don't want to have these symptoms, and they feel ashamed of them. So they try to deny them, they try to hide them.
Well, I think the biggest thing is you feel a severe isolation, like you're the only person out there in the world nobody understands basically, and you're not able really to communicate. Like again, we as a military culture don't tend to, be very sensitive and show our feelings all the time. So you compartmentalize this stuff, you internalize it, and rather than deal with it, you just keep putting it aside, and sooner or later it creeps up on you, and it'll take you down.
The stigma relating to psychological suffering remains a problem in our society. Often the affected member can't or won't acknowledge his injury. But as Canadian Forces members understand and begin to accept these injuries as real, their concern for each other's psychological fitness is growing. A buddy who cares makes a difference.
I met up with an old friend of mine from years past who kind of actually sought me out because he heard through the grapevine or through my wife that I wasn't acting very normally. And he handed me a piece of paper, and it was from the Operational Trauma Center in Ottawa. It was just a little 3-page questionnaire on post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said, I suggest you read this. And so I read it. I filled out the questionnaire, and when I noticed that every single box was checkmarked yes for symptoms or problems, I literally had a breakdown on the spot. Went through the weekend sitting in the shacks because I was separated, wondering what in the hell was wrong with me, and finally made the decision to go see a medical officer.
My wife says I've changed since the tour of 1993 when I come back from that one. I was no longer the happy-go-lucky person I was then. And then I just kept going back for more and more and more. And then finally in the year 2002, halfway through the tour in Afghanistan, I was, my master corporal actually, I call it turning me into the sergeant major because I became an unsociable individual, hard to work with. And I sought help in Afghanistan, and I stayed to complete the tour. So I got to talk to somebody over there, finished the tour, and it was just like the world was lifted off my shoulders, the difference, after speaking to one person for one time.
According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, 1 person in 5 will experience a mental health issue at some point in their lifetime. Leading researchers have also found that only 35% of those who need treatment will actually seek help.
I was going to, the term is, have a long-term solution to what they call the short-term problem. I was going to take my life at that time, and it was that was sort of the turning point. At least I was, at that point, survived, and I checked myself into the hospital, hoping that they would believe that I was just a very, very tired sailor, and that was my problem, and that's what I sort of convinced myself of. And they didn't put me into the tired sailors ward. They sent me up to the psychiatric ward, and that's probably the first step that probably saved my life. I finally was in a position where I had full-time support and help, and it was a start. A slow start, but it was a start. If I hadn't been there, hadn't checked myself in, I probably wouldn't be here.
The sooner that somebody recognizes what's gone wrong, either in their own personal experience or if they're a partner, saying, geez, ever since you came back from that mission, you've been more irritable, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, we need to be doing something about it. Or a supervisor saying, Joe, you're back in the shop, and you're not the same guy that you used to be. Let's talk, let's get people into care if that's what's needed. So I guess what I'm advocating for is where a person is struggling, sooner is better than later. Get into care.
In the late 90s, the Board of Inquiry into Canadian Forces operations in the Balkans officially recognized that stress was an issue that undoubtedly affected the health and welfare of our soldiers. Acknowledgement of operational stress injuries at all levels of the military is the crucial first step to ensuring that members give and receive from each other the necessary support both during and after military operations.
When I first started going to my therapist, I hated going there. I just did not want to go there. I was always angry. I always had to take a few minutes when I got in the car before I could drive. just to settle down and relax, so I became a safe person on the roads again. But now it's up to a point, and I understand where he's coming from, and I accept his methods, and they seem to be working, so I'm not going to change a good thing.
I was relying on the system to fix me. As if I had a broken leg. I was relying on the system to fix my femur so I could go back and be a soldier again. And when I first got diagnosed, I bought every book I could. I was going to learn everything I could about PTSD, and I was going to fucking fix it and go back to work. Well, about 8 months into that, I realized that's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way. And so, you know, that's the frustrating part, is that I just could not fix myself, you know, without help.
Les blessures de stress opérationnel.
Operational stress injuries weren't discovered yesterday. How come our soldiers never heard about these things? A few months ago, I was talking with my uncle, well, my godfather actually, who was there on D-Day in Normandy, and he told me, I've been having nightmares about it for 60 years.
If you come back from a traumatic tour, or come back from a difficult tour, and you start to exhibit some of the problems that I did in 1992, I definitely had a tough time when I came back. But instead of shoving it under the rug or packing it away in your suitcase and forgetting about it, identifying it and going and seeing somebody and talking about it, you've got a much, much better chance of not only going back to work, but preventing getting post-traumatic stress disorder in the first place.
It's an injury. It's not an illness. It's an injury. And an OSI is to be treated as an injury, and in time it will get much better. And you'll be able to get on with your life. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that I know of in the groups that are living normal lives, and they're prescription-free, drug-free, and they're living with it and making the best of it. So, as far as my wife and work and everything like that, we're making it work as best we can.
Operational stress injuries are as real as the suffering and disabilities they cause to Canadian Forces members. Given that our duty requires us to assist and support all people who need our help, doesn't it follow that we should, or must, support our own when they need it most? The Operational Stress Injury Social Support Program was launched by the Department of National Defence in May 2001. It has since become a joint initiative between DND and Veterans Affairs Canada. Our mission is to establish, develop, and improve social support programs for military members, veterans, and their families affected by operational stress, and provide education and training in the Canadian Forces community to create an understanding and acceptance of operational stress injuries. If you or someone you know suffers from an operational stress injury and would like some assistance or to obtain more information on the program, you can do so by consulting our website or by calling our 1-800 number.